welcome back to 16 Days. We're here again with Tyler and Declan, and we're going to be talking about their roles at Durham College in Ontario Tech. So guys, how are we today?
Good.
Well.
Good. So just to start off, I'll start with Tyler. What's your role at DC? And then we'll follow with Declan. And what's your role at Ontario Tech?
So my role is I am the Sexual Violence Educator and Support Coordinator at Durham College, and I work in the Office of Student Diversity, Inclusion, and Transitions. So my role is kind of twofold. So the first part is the sexual violence education, which involves a lot of promotion through campaigns like the one that everyone is participating in for the next 2 weeks, 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, as well as through things like our Yes Means Yes campaign, which is our consent campaign on campus. As well as other workshops and sessions on consent education, sexual violence awareness, general education on sexual violence. And then the other part of my role is the support coordinator part. So any student or community member who's been impacted by sexual violence can come and connect with me. I do informal reporting on campus, and I also ensure that students receive the support and resources that they need. So if they've been impacted, can come chat with me. And I can make sure that they, access whatever kind of care that they know that they do, whether it's physical health care, mental health care, ongoing or short-term support, whatever it might be. I'm there to make sure that they get those connections made.
And my role at Ontario Tech is the Equity and Inclusivity Advisor. So that's within the Office of Student Life. And my role is also kind of a two-folder as well, but a little bit different than Tyler's. So basically, part of my role is, a main part is a lot of education around different equity topics. So that includes gender-based violence and consent and sexual violence prevention, as well as human rights, anti-racism stuff, whole whack of different social justice type topics. So we do that through discussion groups, workshops, social media campaigns, that kind of thing. Just trying to educate as well as provide students with skills of how to intervene and respond to discrimination and harassment. And then the other part of my role is support for students who have experienced discrimination, harassment, and sometimes sexual violence as well. So similar to Tyler, just basically helping students get the support that they need. So whether they want to learn about formal and informal reporting processes, or if that's referrals to different other services, or sometimes just a listening ear and a space to talk about their experiences. Yeah, so that's my role at the university.
Great, thank you. And it might seem like sort of a silly question, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what sexual violence actually encompasses.
Yeah. So the definition of sexual violence is that it's any act or acts targeting an individual based on their sexuality, gender identity, or gender expression, and it can be anything that's physical or psychological. So sexual violence itself is kind of an umbrella term, which covers things like sexual harassment, sexual assault, voyeurism, stalking, trafficking, all things like that. Yeah, it's kind of a broad definition.
Was there anything you wanted to add, Declan?
I think Tyler gave a great definition. The only thing I like to point out is that just when people think of sexual violence, they often think right of sexual assault or rape or things like that. And that is absolutely a part of sexual violence. But like Tyler mentioned, it's a really broad umbrella term and incorporates lots of other things, including verbal things or comments, as well as physical and other things. So yeah, but great definition.
Can you tell us what Durham College and Ontario Tech do to combat sexual violence?
Yeah. So to combat sexual violence, it involves a lot of the education piece. So educating students, staff, every community member about the definition of sexual violence, how to prevent it, and how to offer that support to students. Also through things like the 16 Days of Activism campaign or the Yes Means Yes campaign, providing those education pieces and really encouraging students, staff, everybody to get involved and, be proactive, be pro-social bystanders really, in the fight against sexual violence. Also offering that, that one-on-one student support, like my role offers, as well as other student support that my office in general offers are pretty key ways that we offer, are trying to combat sexual violence at DC.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tyler. Ontario Tech does very similar things. So, that education aspect that Tyler mentioned is huge. We do consent pledges where we ask students to, or staff as well, just anyone in the Ontario Tech community to make a pledge to do something, to take action to create a culture of consent at Ontario Tech. As well as We Get Consent campaign, similar to the Yes Means Yes campaign, of just like education, awareness about what consent is, what sexual violence is, things like that. So the education aspect, we do have a policy that condemns acts of sexual violence and is a tool that students can use if they want to report and be empowered that way in terms of if they have experienced sexual violence. We also we have support workers who support folks who have experienced sexual violence. So similar to Tyler's role, we have support workers that can provide, referrals to supports that they need, information on different reporting processes, as well as ours are mental health counselors. So if counseling is something you're looking for, they can provide that as well as accommodations. They can kind of coordinate that if you need accommodations for like work or school or anything like that. And I guess the last thing is we have a sexual violence prevention and support committee that's like ongoing throughout the year. And they are continually like assessing how these education and support initiatives are going and constantly advising and making different changes so that we're properly supporting our students.
Great. Can you tell us what students can do if they've been impacted by sexual violence, or alternatively, if they know somebody who's been impacted by sexual violence?
Yeah, so at Durham College, if someone has been impacted personally, or they have a peer or a friend who might have been impacted by sexual violence, they definitely can come and talk to us at our office. Like I said, we do the informal reporting. However, if someone wants to formally report, we can make those connections for them. Similar to what Declan said, we have our own sexual violence policy on campus. So under that, students can get the information they need, make those connections, and we also provide we have our campus health center, so we have physical health care as well as mental health nurses who can assist students, as well as we have our well-being centers, which provides short-term, long-term mental health support for students. With our role, we can also make connections to off-campus supports if students require, so things like off-campus community partners that you'll learn a little bit more about actually throughout this week, or the couple weeks of 16 days of activism. But there's the main thing to really kind of keep in mind is that any student who comes in is going to be supported and believed if they've been impacted by sexual violence. So, there shouldn't be, we're hoping to take down those barriers for them to accessing care if they've been impacted by sexual violence at DC.
The Ontario Tech side, I won't add too much more just because like our supports are very similar. The only difference is for an Ontario Tech student, you would contact a support worker, and you can do that by visiting ontariotech.ca/sexual violence. There's a whole bunch of information about what their role is there. So I won't rehash because we have pretty much the same supports that Tyler just mentioned, but the support worker is the person that you would go to. And the other thing I would just, like Tyler mentioned, like when you do come forward, like you will be believed and supported, as well as I like to emphasize that to access supports like counseling or accommodations or anything like that, you don't need to report. And I assume it's the same thing with DC. You can access all those supports whether or not you decide to formally report sexual violence. And the other thing is it's a very student-driven process. So like no one is going to tell you what you need for you. We recognize that support looks different for every survivor. So it's very student driven and you lead what happens to you and nothing will ever happen that you like without your consent basically.
Absolutely. And I just like to add one thing. We also have our sexual violence website, which I kind of forgot to mention. But if you just search durhamcollege.ca/sexual violence, you can see a list of supports on and off campus supports. I'm sure it's pretty similar to like on the Ontario Tech side. But yeah, it's kind of like a main database for information on our policy as well as other kind of supports and resources and like our contact information as well.
I did to add, because the question was kind of double. It's like, what do you if you've been impacted, as well as if you know someone. So our support workers, similar to what Tyler mentioned, for her position, our support workers can be accessed by friends of someone who's been impacted as well. So if you're looking to learn more about how to support someone who's experienced sexual violence, you can connect with a support worker and they can kind of talk you through that. Other things that are really important are, to listen to their story with empathy, and don't pry for additional details. So you don't need to know everything that happened. You can just kind of listen to whatever they want to tell you. Thank them for sharing with you. Believe them, like we talked about before. And you can ask, what does support look like for you? Is there anything that I can do or support you making connections? Because you don't want to assume what they want, but you also do want to be there if they do want some support. And if you are looking for kind of more in-depth conversations, like how to support someone who's experienced sexual violence, we do offer disclosure training. So you can check out the more details about that on the sexual violence website, or you can email me at equity@ontariotecU.ca.
Thanks. And our last question is, how can students get involved?
So students can get involved, especially with our consent campaign. That's the main place that we're really looking for people to, get involved. And it's not just simply, getting volunteer hours and giving your time. It's kind of embodying that whole, yes means yes ideology throughout your time at DC. Being an advocate for consent, and being that supportive person. We also have campaigns, so things like 16 Days of Activism, get involved. So it's just simply like attending events, getting the education and sharing it with your peers. We also host sessions and workshops, etc. I'm hosting monthly workshops called Supporting Survivors, where you learn a little bit more and it goes a little bit more in depth. So basically what Declan was just saying, how to be that supportive person and, make sure that you're connecting someone who's been impacted with sexual violence to the appropriate resources. But yeah, more the educate, yeah.
I love it. Again, similar on the Ontario Tech side. So, you can follow Ontario Tech or DC, depending on where you are on social media, because that's where we really promote a lot of these things. We have our RISE workshop, which stands for Respecting Individual Supporting Equity. So we have a workshop specifically about sexual violence prevention. And so if you want to learn more, you can go there, as well as our disclosure training if you want to learn about how to support someone who's experienced sexual violence. We have ongoing equity discussion groups throughout the year that talk about various different equity topics. So, often it's brought up about sexual violence and gender-based violence and things like that. You can also, if you're looking to be more engaged and really have a role in some of this work, we do recruit equity advocates every year. So that's a great space. We usually have an equity advocate group that does something around either feminism, gender-based violence, sexual violence, something like that. It's a student determined topic. So that's a great way you can get involved, as well as we are always looking for student reps for our sexual violence prevention and support committee. So if you want to learn more about what that committee does and if learn about how to get involved, you can check out our website that we mentioned before as well.
I'll actually just mention, because I kind of forgot about this, but we also have our Kiss with Consent campaign that happens in February, where we actually are looking for student volunteers and student leaders to actually have that kind of peer-to-peer education piece. So we run it in the month of February, and it's just kind of like a fun trivia game that we play. Might look a little bit different this year, but it's still going to be happening, and it's just that consent education piece, and then making sure that students know what supports look like, what to expect when you access the support if you've been impacted by sexual violence, and where they can go. So definitely follow us on social media, like Declan said. For Durham College, it's yes means yes at DC on Instagram. But that's where we post all our upcoming sessions, all our upcoming workshops and training, that we have going on.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, Tyler and Declan, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow, where we're going to learn a little bit more about the Durham Rape Crisis Center. See you then.